Hi, I'm Bryce Huffman. I'm a reporter and producer here at Bridge Detroit. This morning, I'm joined by Anthony Adams, who is the former deputy mayor of the city of Detroit, former school board president here, and current candidate for mayor. How's it going, Anthony?
Good morning, Mr. Hoffman. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good.
Right.
Could I just get a brief reaction from you to Mayor Duggan's State of the City address last night?
It's always interesting when you do a speech like that. You really start off with what are the most pressing issues in the city of Detroit, and I found it ironic that he would wait almost an hour and 30 minutes into the presentation before he even began to address the issue of crime in the city of Detroit. As we all know, crime is the critical issue in our city. People are afraid to leave their homes, they're afraid to drive the freeways. We have police cars flying through the city, hitting and killing people. And so there was no attention addressed to that issue, which I think is the major issue facing people in the city of Detroit.
I've heard you talk about crime before. When you first announced you were running, for instance, you mentioned that police reform was a big issue for you. How do you plan to reform the police? I know that the mayor and the police chief now have kind of one idea of how to police. What kind of ideas do you think you'll be bringing to the table?
Well, we really don't know what the mayor's ideal of policing is because he seems to have conveniently separated himself from the operation of the police department and leaves that handling to the chief. I think you would see a much more robust involvement of the mayor's office with respect to the issue of crime and the issue of policing. I believe fundamentally that there are a number of things that need to change within the department. For example, we've got to remove some of the anti-accountability provisions in the DPOA contract, which inhibit the ability of the department to take action against officers who go rogue. Right now, currently, for example, there are two officers. One has 85 complaints, the other has 45 complaints, and yet there's been no action taken with respect to disciplining these officers. Those types of things cannot be allowed to occur because they erode confidence and faith of people in the police. I also believe that we need to change exactly how we train our police officers. Too often they go through their training period, which is a 6 or 8 week period. They get in shape, they learn how to shoot a gun, they learn how to put handcuffs on, but there is no soft skill training. And so, from my perspective, we need to have police officers trained in mental health issues. They need to work in a mental health facility. They need to work in a homeless shelter. They need to work at at-risk kids so that they better understand that these are people that have issues and need to be treated with dignity and respect. In addition, I think we've also got to be much more proactive in how we police our community. And what I mean by proactive intervention, I mean we've got to have many more community intervention specialists, people who go out and engage young people, for example, at-risk youth, and trying to understand what their needs are, how we really get them back in the system, who understand that when you have a mental health issue run, that we don't necessarily need to dispatch the police to that kind of situation, but we need to dispatch a mental health professional. I've also talked about the issue of how we begin to decriminalize certain types of conduct here in the city of Detroit. I think we spend far too much time giving tickets and misdemeanors for things when we should be giving warnings and sort of having administrative proceedings so that we get people out of the role of being criminalized and having criminal records, and then it makes it much more difficult for them to get jobs. And so those are just a few of the reform efforts that I would be enacting, in addition to eliminating reliance upon facial recognition technology, which is a racially biased technology. And I don't know how you use a technology like that in the city of Detroit, which is 80% Black. We simply will not use that technology. It really doesn't do what it needs to do. We need to be much more proactive, much more engaging in our population so that we can begin to address the issue of crime. But addressing the issue of crime is only one aspect of it, because if we don't also begin to address the issue of poverty in our community, then we're never going to eliminate crime. And so those two things really go hand in hand, and we've got to work together to reduce the level of poverty within our community. And I've got some pretty creative ideas on how I think we can go about doing that.
Last year, we saw protest after protest calling to defund the police, reallocate resources away from the police, demilitarize the police. Do those protests, does that movement factor into your understanding of reforming the police department?
It clearly it does, because to the extent that we have a police department that's viewed as an occupying army, that is not the type of attitude and perspective I think we need to have about our police, because our police are a critical part of our community. We obviously need police doing the jobs that they need to do, but there is a different approach to how I think we need to go about doing that. And when we had the peaceful protest last year where the demonstrators were fired upon and beaten by the police, that was a disgrace from my perspective, because these were young people that were exercising their right to protest and bring about reform. So we've got to change the feeling. We've got to change the relationship between our young people and our police department. But we also have to encourage our young people that you can't just simply complain and ask for reform. You've got to also become a part of the reform process. And we need some more of our young people who want to become police officers. But we can't have a good police force and a good perspective about police force if we're constantly demonizing our police for what they do. And so I think there's a careful balance that we've got to engage in order to move the process forward, to have people who want to be a part of the reform movement, both on the inside and the outside of that relationship. I think that's important.
Another big issue in the city beyond policing is, of course, neighborhood development. A lot of Detroiters, especially longtime Detroiters, feel like they've been left behind by the current administration and past administrations when it comes to investing in their community. What's your solution to investing equally and equitably in Detroit neighborhoods?
Well, the irony of economic development is that benefits should not be distributed equally across the city. When you have communities like Rosedale Park, Sherwood Forest, Palmer Woods, these are great communities. They clearly need services, trash collection, police services, things of that nature. But the housing stock in those communities is pretty stable. The people who live there have decent incomes, and so they would get, from an the development perspective, I would not focus a lot of attention on those areas because they're pretty solid. I think what we have to begin to do is shift our resources to those communities that are in severe need. And so when you talk about Brightmoor, when you go far east side, when you go in Southwest Detroit, you have a lot of communities are starving for a neighborhood stabilization plan. How do we stabilize those neighborhoods? How do we stabilize people in those homes? I think, the administration missed a good opportunity when they had more than $500 million of hardest hits funds and yet used virtually none of that money to help stabilize people in their homes, instead choosing to go on a demolition rampage, which released toxic asbestos and lead in our community and elevated lead labels within our community. And so we've got to change the focus on how we actually spend our dollars. We have to spend a lot more dollars in stabilizing our neighborhoods, providing the people who have been here with the resources that they need. That means we got to shift our focus away from what I call gentrified developments, mixed use developments, where they're building an apartment complex and they might have 50 units in the building and they've only allocated 10 two-bedroom units for affordable housing. And yet when you look at the rent structure for those units, it's obviously outside the reach of the average Detroiter who only earns $26,000 to $27,000 a year. And you're asking them to pay $1,300, $1,400 a month for a two-bedroom apartment in a gentrified development. I don't think that's a good use of our dollars. I think we've got to shift our dollars and providing direct subsidies for people who are living in single-family homes, who want to aspire to move into single-family homes, and to create a more of a home ownership environment in the city. We're a city that has 55% of the people who live here actually rent rather than own their homes. That's a model that cannot be sustained if you're really talking about how we stabilize our communities and provide the people who live here with the resources. And that includes our senior citizens, where we would eliminate a loan program and we would go with straight grant programs for our senior citizens because they've already paid their dues in the city.
All right. And just one last question. What is your favorite thing that Mayor Duggan has accomplished in his time as mayor? And what is something that you think he's completely missed on, or something that he did not do the way you would have done?
Well, I mean, the one thing he's done well is that he's courted the corporate community. He has engaged them, and he's done their bidding. And so I can't argue with respect to how he's handled and engaged the corporate community. I think where he's failed miserably is in addressing issues of needs within the community, not recognizing that we have a poverty issue in the city of Detroit. The city of Detroit has always ranked first or second and poverty rates. And he's done very little to attack that issue because he doesn't understand the context in which structural and institutional racism prohibits and inhibits the actual growth and development of Detroit. One example of that, for example, would be the issue of mortgage lending within the city of Detroit. There was a recent study which showed that blacks and whites of comparable credit scores, whites are given mortgages at a much better rate than blacks. That's a vestige of institutional racism. And if we have people who want to move in the city, young black people and young white people, they should be given an equal opportunity to obtain mortgages in the city. That's an institution of racism issue and structural racism issue, which we have to begin to address. Because if we don't address issues of structural racism and inequity, whether it's in housing, whether it's in education, whether it's in our digital divide, we're not going to move this city forward.
All right. Anthony Adams is former deputy mayor of Detroit, former school board president, and candidate for mayor. Thank you so much for talking with me.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right.